Before we begin, please support the channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing this video. Constructive discussion is always welcome, and we invite you to share your views and insights in the comments. U.S. market update, SpaceX IPO, CTA levels, and tech technicals. This video presents a direct informational narration of the source document. Today, we're diving into a chronological breakdown of the latest market data from June 11, 2026. We'll be reviewing individual technical levels and looking closely at the quantitative mechanics surrounding some massive upcoming liquidity events. Here's our roadmap for today. We're starting with a broad market overview, then zooming in on Microsoft's technicals and broader tech sector updates. After that, we'll unpack the sheer scale of the SpaceX IPO parameters and its valuation. Finally, we'll wrap up by checking in on critical CTA positioning. Section 1. Market Overview and Macro Drivers. Now, the trading session was actually pretty flat and stable right up until about 1:30 p.m. But then, rapid geopolitical headlines hit the wire. We saw initial statements from the U.S. president suggesting a potential escalation of force regarding Iran. Almost immediately, though, a subsequent statement clarified that no attack would occur and an agreement was essentially reached. This rapid fundamental whiplash directly shifted financial market flows. Accompanying these macro shifts, Brent crude oil prices took a sharp dive, crossing right below the $90 per barrel threshold. And what's really interesting here is the direct inverse correlation we observed. Those dropping oil prices coincided exactly with a broad equity rally. The semiconductor index, or the SOX, surged an impressive 8%, completely reversing a potential false breakdown from the day before. The S&P 500 also showed strong market breadth today, with 320 advancing stocks compared to just 181 declining. This rally was heavily concentrated in the technology sector and the energy-sensitive industrial sector, with both recording solid gains exceeding 3%. Moving on to Section 2, Microsoft Technical Analysis. Microsoft actually stood out today as a declining asset during that broader market rally, with its closing price dropping below $392. Looking at the technical data, the price is currently testing its 200-week moving average, as well as the previous downward trend line on the weekly chart. Since it broke that $392 level, the asset is now officially classified as entering a range-bound consolidation phase. For those of you with longer-term horizons, the $300 to $400 range is being identified as an accumulation value zone. But if we want to see a resumption of an upward breakout, the price absolutely has to reclaim the $435 level. It's also worth noting that this current upside momentum phase is noticeably slower and smaller in magnitude compared to its last two historical rallies. Let's broaden the lens a bit in Section 3, Tech Sector Stock Updates. Let's rapid fire through the technical posture of some key portfolio stocks. TSMC is maintaining a really strong upward trajectory, with targets extending above $449 thanks to its sector-leading position. Google demonstrated a highly effective bottoming pattern on expanding volume, confirming a solid base of support at $343. Marvell is facing some newly established resistance bands, specifically at $287 to $288 and again at $298 to $310. Now, Micron successfully broke above the $97 level today, closing at $995 on moderate volume. Its next minor upward resistance sits between $1013 and $1015. Intel is showing a support range of $105 to $113, with resistance at $115 to $122. ARM's immediate support is holding between $1,000 and $1,090. Looking at Tesla, it unfortunately broke lower, rendering it unfavorable for short-term entry right now around that $400 zone. And finally, TRV remains stuck in a 4-month sideways consolidation, approaching a long-term target entry zone of $321 to $405. All right, on to the main event in Section 4, the SpaceX IPO parameters. The final prospectus is out, confirming the pricing at $135 per share. With an offering size of 555.6 million shares, we are looking at a total capital raise of $75 billion. And that's excluding any over-allotment options. This unprecedented scale officially establishes SpaceX as the largest IPO in history. At this 135 issue price, their market capitalization hits $1.77 trillion, or an astonishing $1.8 trillion on a fully diluted basis, when you account for employee stock options and restricted stock units. Right out of the gate, this immediately cements the entity as one of the top 10 largest public companies on the planet. Which brings us directly to Section 5, SpaceX Valuation and Trading Dynamics. The data here shows a really stark divergence between retail market sentiment and institutional analysis. If you look at prediction markets like Polymarket, they're assigning an 84% probability to the first day closing price exceeding that $135 issue price.
They even give it a 46% chance of gaining more than 20%. Plus, retail subscription requests have absolutely flooded in, exceeding $100 billion and heavily oversubscribing their allocated tranche. Conversely, Morningstar's valuation models are painting a very different picture. They calculate a fair value of just $63 per share, which is less than half the offering price. They are explicitly warning of a significant disconnect between current market expectations and the underlying fundamentals.
As for the mechanical constraints of this IPO, pure equity trading kicks off on Friday. The source documentation notes that retail participants are largely focusing on short-term technical speculation here, rather than fundamental valuation or long-term holding. We should absolutely anticipate extreme price volatility over the first 2 weeks before NASDAQ index inclusion happens. This is primarily being driven by an ultra-low public float, which is estimated at roughly 5% of total shares. Another key detail: options trading will not be available on day one. The earliest estimated arrival for options is next Tuesday, and that is strictly contingent upon clearinghouse and market maker infrastructure readiness.
Let's shift gears to a critical risk metric in Section 6, the CTA Systematic Positioning Update. Commodity Trading Advisor, or CTA, positioning levels have just been updated. Now, previous upward index movements were accompanied by minimal institutional buying, but the crucial thing to note is that the downside trigger level has now shifted higher. The current index level sits at 73.94, and that critical downside trigger is now positioned very closely behind it at 73.30. If the market dips and hits the 73.30 threshold, calculations show it could spark an estimated $40 billion to $60 billion in automated algorithmic selling. That is definitely a level warranting close observation.
So, bringing it all together, the integration of these macro data points, technical levels, and the sheer scale of the SpaceX listing points towards significant anticipated volatility. A central question we have to monitor tomorrow is whether the unprecedented gravity of this $75 billion SpaceX IPO will siphon liquidity away from the broader technology sector, or if it'll serve as a catalyst for related high-volume equities, some of which actually experienced technical squeezes right before this listing. As the source text playfully pointed out, the year 2026 is projected to exhibit elevated volatility and market turbulence, comparing it metaphorically to the unprecedented rate of red pards we just saw in the recent World Cup opening match. Market participants are strongly advised to strictly monitor those immediate liquidity impacts and CTA algorithmic triggers in the upcoming sessions.